Hello YouTube, this is Johnny here again with your weekly aphorism. Today we'll be discussing an interesting note found without context in the notebooks of Russian author Anton Chekhov. Before we get to the aphorism itself, a little background. Chekhov was born in January 1860 in Taganrog, Russia. He had a difficult childhood and an abusive father. After going bankrupt, his father moved the family to Moscow to avoid debtor's prison. Chekhov stayed behind to finish his education. Eventually, he became a physician and writer. According to Wikipedia, he apparently made more money from writing than doctoring, and often treated the poor for free. He eventually became more popular as a writer, traveled a lot, got tuberculosis, wrote a lot of good plays and stories, and died of his symptoms in June 1904. I want to discuss this particular bit of esoterica because I think it strikes at an incredibly important aspect of discourse that has some philosophical roots. What Chekhov wrote in his notebook was this: "There is no national science, just as there is no national multiplication table. What is national is no longer science." Now, I totally agree with this, but more importantly, more interesting, there's a lot of things that can be unpacked here. First off, let's have a quick thought experiment. Let's say you are a Danish engineer and you're trying to get a trebuchet to hurl a rock some particular amount, say 500 feet. Well, you're going to model the flight of the object, add the relevant variables in, and you can get a pretty good approximation of the flight path. Eventually, you'll be able to reliably hurl the same object 500 feet where you want to, or more or less. Okay, now move the trebuchet to Lebanon. Does it still work? Of course it does. It would be ridiculous to suppose that this would work differently within the borders of a different country if otherwise the conditions were very similar. Of course, that's perhaps a superficial point, and the person who believes in nationalistic polylogism might respond that it's more the ethno-national makeup of the people that determines their psychology, which somehow shapes reality itself, determining whether or not the trebuchet exists in the first place. But the point is, whether the engineer is Chinese or Norwegian or whatever in origin, the trebuchet is, all else equal, going to work because they work how they work. Independent discoveries of the same phenomena have certainly happened in different places on the globe, such as calculus, for example, discovered by Newton and Leibniz simultaneously. And there's tons, I could name tons and tons of examples. It's not really, I think it's pretty obvious that that's a thing. The true root issue of Chekhov's comment is called polylogism, the idea that different groups of people reason differently, or to put it another way, that there is not consistency in the way that we figure out what is true and what is not, that there are not more proper and less proper ways to figure out the way the world operates. But instead it's based on who you are, or some such. A great example of this sort of thing is teleology. You see, according to The Independent, and I'll put a link to this in the description after I finish recording the video. Now, but according to The Independent, Terence Howard has created his own system of mathematics that, by the way, no one is allowed to see until he patents it, which I'm not sure makes sense, because I'm not sure you can patent mathematical truths. Maybe you can, I don't know, I'm not an expert on that, but anyway. This system of mathematics has rejected that 1 times 1 equals 1, apparently for the following reason. He asks, helpfully, how can it equal 1? If 1 times 1 equals 1, that means 2 is of no value because 1 times itself has no effect. 1 times 1 equals 2 because the square root of 4 is 2, so what's the square root of 2? Should be 1. But we're told it's 2, and that cannot be, unquote. So, wow, first off, the square root of 2 is not 1 or 2, but an irrational number that can be approximated as 1.414 and goes on irrationally forever from there. I don't see at all how 2 is of no value because 1 times itself has no effect. Why would 2 be of no value? How does 1 times 1 being 1 mean that 2 is what, undefined? 0? Not have a value? I mean, it's hard to interpret this bit charitably or in any other way, because it just seems like nonsense. Now, I'm not trying to rag on the guy, but I'm just pointing out that if we take polylogism really radically, all the way down to a totally individual level, we might even argue that this form of mathematics is true for Terence, and perhaps even give reasons why we shouldn't produce arguments for why it doesn't make sense or it should be rejected or why it's false. But imagine a world where every architect built their bridges with their own personal mathematical system. Would you want to drive on it? And you can extrapolate the issues with this to all professions, all fields, and see how very quickly, like, that's a big deal. We don't need that. That's not a good idea to embrace that. I think all of this, by the way, is so obvious that it hardly needs to be said, except, it's come back into fashion to some extent. People both on the far left and the far right, and from a lot of other perspectives, seem to want to partition everyone into demographics and limit their individual human capacities to ethno-national norms, which are irresponsibly, incorrectly deemed immutable and overridingly defining of one's character. I think this is a truly deplorable aspect of current discourse, and it needs to stop. Luckily, for us, truth is the possible object of all mankind, and not merely some so-called elite, political or ethnic or whatever. I'm hopeful that eventually we'll all get everything sorted out together and be able to bridge our societies, heal from our prior injustices, which there is no denying have occurred, and prevent new ones, and understand the way the world works. But this can't happen if there's no widespread agreement on proper standards for establishing the truth or falsity of our ideas about the world. If we can't agree on the meaning of basic things like logic, how could we possibly arrive at any kind of consensus on much more controversial subjects like justice? No, we will find strife instead, only. So let's keep in mind that truth is the jurisdiction of not just one man, one nation, one race, one gender, one whatever, but instead it's for all the world, okay? That's all I got this time, but I want to thank everyone who has subscribed and watched these videos. And I'm really sorry for the long delay between videos. I got another job, and I've gotten really involved in a new music project, so I've had to adjust to the new normal for a bit. But I think I'm getting to the point where I can start putting them out again on a regular basis. So I've got my time management a little more in control. So stay tuned till next time, and keep your wits about you. Peace.